Hey guys, it's Lucky Ghost here, and today we're going to go over the Necromancer. This build is incredibly powerful. The best thing about this build is it doesn't require any specific legendary, so I'm not going to tell you, hey, you need to go get this or the build sucks. That really wasn't a problem for the Necromancer. I was able to use this build to basically steamroll absolutely every boss the game put in front of me with no sweat at all. You'll be able to do the same thing if you follow the build, so here it is. And by the way, there's a written guide linked in the description that tells you what order to put your skills in and which aspects to look for and how to get them. The first attack we're going to talk about is our basic attack, and if you don't know, this is your resource generator. You use this ability to generate resources so that you can use the next ability we'll talk about to spend those resources. I'm going to go ahead and take Bone Splinters, and the primary reason I'm going to take this is because it's kind of a cleave attack. It hits multiple targets, and we're going to grab the passive that makes it shoot 2 additional projectiles if you're above half resources. And then this one right here is the big one, initiate Bone Splinters. Bone Splinters has a 20% chance per hit to make your enemies vulnerable for 2 seconds. Vulnerable enemies take 20% increased damage from you. So if you manage to get an enemy vulnerable while building up resources, that's great, because then all your minions, see this army of minions standing right next to me? I've got about 10 minions standing with me right now. All of them are going to be doing 20% more damage to that enemy if you manage to make it vulnerable, and you will. We've got plenty of ways to make enemies vulnerable because it's just such a powerful debuff. The next thing is going to be our core attack. This is our spender. We generate resources with this one, and then when we have enough resources, we go into spending those resources. I'm going to be spending them on Bone Spear. Most of the time, if you use this on an enemy, if it's not a really chunky one, it's going to one-shot them. So it'll just cut through a group of enemies and kill them, right? Which is great for the skill that we follow this one up with. I'll talk about that in a second. For the passives on this one, we're going to take Enhanced Bone Spear, which is going to break it into 3 shards when it's destroyed. So it'll hit a wall and it'll bounce off that wall and hit the targets around it again. Very nice. When it goes through, if it somehow doesn't kill them, there's a good chance it will when it bounces back. Then Bone Spear makes the first enemy hit vulnerable for 3 seconds. This is nice. That's that 20% increased damage. Bone Spear, you run out of resources fast. You can only cast it 4 times before you run out. And then we have maybe the star of the show. It's going to be Corpse Explosion. This skill is just so dirty, man. It blows up. It does so much damage in massive AoE fashion. Right? So what you're going to do here is you're going to kill an enemy with your Bone Spear, and then you're going to, as soon as that enemy dies, you're going to pop it with your Corpse Explosion. And this will almost certainly kill everything around it. If it doesn't kill everything around it, it's going to kill at least one more thing around it. And so you Corpse Explosion that next corpse, and now everything's dead. Almost always a couple Corpse Explosions is enough, unless it's a real meaty pack or maybe some elites. And then you might have to go back and forth between Bone Spear, Corpse Explosion, Bone Spear, and Corpse Explosion. But for the passives on this one, we're going to take Corpse Explosion's radius increased by 15%. Amazing. That feels great. And then Corpse Explosion deals 10% increased damage to enemies that are slowed, stunned, or vulnerable. Remember how we have 2 sources of vulnerable? So now that 20% just got turned into 30% increased damage. That's huge, man. That's huge, because this is already doing a ton of damage. Now it's doing 30% more. Let's talk quickly about some passives that you'll kind of circle around and get. And the first one is going to be whenever you're trying to spend points to unlock Corpse Explosion, right? You're basically going to put the minimum amount of points in each section. You're going to put just your points into Bone Splinters just until you get to Bone Spear. And then as soon as you get to Bone Spear, you're going to put the minimum points into Bone Spear and its passives. And then you're going to put as many points as necessary into Hewed Flesh to get your Corpse Explosion. So every time you have extra points before you unlock the next ability, you're going to be putting it into this. And the reason is lucky hit, your damage has a 12% chance to create a corpse at the target's location. This chance is doubled against bosses. So it goes from 12 to 24 against bosses. This is critical because the only time your Necro is going to be weak is in a boss fight where the boss is not spawning ads. And so inevitably your minions will slowly one by one die, at least especially early on. Later in the game, this wasn't a problem because we've got a lot of solutions for this. But this is going to make it so that you're constantly creating corpses, which means even if the boss isn't spawning ads and he's killing your ads, you're going to be creating corpses with this passive to spawn more ads, right? Amazing. Absolutely amazing passive for the Necro. Really hard one to pass up, especially until you get some other stuff floating later on that's going to really help with that. Another great passive to grab is consuming a corpse generates 9 essence. And this is why we don't really need to use this skill right here, because this skill, your basic attacks in this game are kind of weak. They don't feel great to use. You're really, most of the time, you're only using it if you absolutely have to, because you're going to notice when you use this skill, it's not going to hit nearly as hard as this skill, right? So It's not even in this. It feels awful to use your basic attack. So you want to use it as little as possible. But what if you could generate resources by using your corpse explosion? And my corpse explosion right now, it's a giant AoE attack that does 587 to 718 damage. And it generates resources better than my basic attack does, which does a fraction of the damage. And that's because of this passive right here. So max this out. And then what you do is you corpse explode, corpse explode, corpse explode. You fill up your resource bar. Then you bone spear, bone spear, bone spear, bone spear. You drain your resource bar and then you fill it up again with corpse. So you're kind of going back and forth. This is your generator, which also happens to be your hardest hitting ability. And then this is your spender. Really fun setup. I can't express it enough, right? Then we're gonna, while you're grabbing these passives, right? It's gonna bounce you here. I didn't use a curse, because the curses are very defensive. I'm not going Thorns build, so I really didn't need Iron Maiden. If you want, Corpse Tendril was a fun ability. I played around with it. It's basically going to vacuum enemies in to it, and it's going to stack them so that you can then throw your Bone Spear through it and corpse explode. So it's a nice little, crowd control thing, and it'll stun the enemies. So the next passive for this one is enemies in the range of the corpse tendrils are slowed by 50%. So it slows the enemies by 50%. That feels great. And then you've got the next one, corpse tendrils has a 20% chance when damaging enemies to drop a blood orb. Blood orbs are a necromancer unique. It's like free health potions that the necromancer can pick up off the floor. So you can normally only hold 5 potions, and you have to spend these while you're playing. The necromancer can force enemies to drop blood orbs, and if you walk over it, you pick it up and it heals you without spending one of your precious 5 potions in that fight, in that boss fight. Say if you're in a fight that actually demands that kind of effort from you. Another one that's really fun to use if you want is Bone Spirit. I used both of these abilities until later on. So later on, I'll tell you what I replaced these with, but you don't really get to replace them until you get to 25. So until then, enjoy these. They're fun. Bone Spirit is going to do a ton of damage. It does 3% more damage for each point of your essence spent. So you use this ability first. You're walking up to a group of enemies and you chuck this at them, right? And so that's going to do 300% increased damage because you're at 100% essence. So 3 times 100, right? 3% times 100. So it's 300% increased damage, and you chuck it at the enemy and it blows up, and it's almost certainly going to make a corpse for you, which means you can start using corpse explosion, which is going to start generating resources so that you can this one has a long cooldown. The great thing about the other 2 abilities we're using, like 99% of your kills will come from these 2 abilities. And the best thing about these is, well, 99% of your kills that aren't from your minions, which are, by the way, wrecking balls. They're killing everything for you. But 99% of your damage is coming from these 2 abilities, and neither one has a cooldown, which feels great in a game that is filled with cooldowns. There's a lot of long cooldown abilities that are really fun to use. They feel great, but they've got like 10, 13, 15, 16-second cooldowns, not these ones. You can just go bam, 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 right back and forth. Feels amazing. Okay, so there's this one. Use that bar space if you want. You are totally fine to just spec into passives and focus on making these 2 as strong as possible and just live that live that Bone Spear corpse explosion life if you want to. But I found these to be pretty fun. Good crowd control, stacks them up, good spender, blows up big, nice way to lead a fight off. And then it's got a long cooldown. So by the time it's done cooling down, you probably already won the battle. As for your ultimate, I messed around with all 3 ultimates on the Necromancer, and I gotta say, none of them, at least at level 25, none of them felt incredibly impressive. None of them blew my socks off, but they were all solid. They were all good, but there wasn't one where I was like, this is the one you have to use. And I ended up, the last one I tried and stuck with was Blood Wave, and it's going to take the passive that slows the enemies by 50% for 4 seconds after it hits them. And then Blood Wave leaves behind 3 blood orbs as it travels. And so I took this one just in case I was in a situation, let's say I'm fighting the Butcher and it's a battle that's dragging on. I'm going to run out of potions probably at some point, and I can use the Blood Wave to basically force the Butcher to spawn 3 blood orbs, 3 heals for me. And so it's kind of a sustained thing. The damage from all of these none of them was terribly impressive compared to the damage I was getting from Bone Spear and Corpse Explosion. And that's why I say that. I think, later on, maybe when we are able to go way past 25, we'll be able to do things to really soup these up. I already found one legendary that does buff this ability, and I'll show you that in a second here when I go over legendaries to keep an eye out for. But yeah, so if you run this build and all you're doing is just grabbing rares and putting them on, you are going to truck, man. You're going to absolutely destroy things. But there's a very, very important thing to know about the Necromancer. It's real easy to miss, and that is opening up your summons menu, your Book of the Dead, right? So Shift C on computer, and it opens up this menu. And if you click on the skeleton warrior, this is what you'll be able to grab first. I took this one first. I took skirmishers because that's all you can grab at low level. And I grabbed this one here. You can raise one extra skeleton because I wanted the biggest army possible. That was basically the vibe. I wanted a walking literal army with me, and then corpse explosion and bone spear. And it worked out amazing. Later, when you unlock Reapers, take this. The best thing about the Reapers is this passive right here. Reapers have a 15% chance to carve the flesh off of enemies, forming a corpse. So it's another thing that's passively generating corpses. Corpses are your primary form of damage because corpse explosion. You're spending them constantly. You're constantly blowing things up with your corpse explosion. If you don't have corpses, all of a sudden you're relying on your bone spear, but your bone spear is going to run you dry real fast if you don't have corpses to explode to generate resources with that passive that we talked about earlier, where every time you use a corpse explosion, it generates resources. So you see that synergy that happens there. The more corpses you have, the more infinite your sustain is. It becomes impossible for you to run out of resources. So when you can, grab the Reaper instead of, you can only pick one. Just FYI, you only get to pick one. If I grab this, all my summons would unspawn. Same for this one. And so we take this, grab it, take that 15%. Later on, when you eventually unlock your skeletal mages at, I believe, 15, I went ahead and you can take whatever you want. And then eventually I took this one here. Reduces the life cost of your bone mages attacks from 15% to 10%. And after being alive for 5 seconds, bone mages deal 40% increased damage. So I saw 40% increased damage and I was like, heck yeah, that looks like it's going to feel good. And it did. It felt amazing. So I took that. If you don't want minions for some reason, you can always take the passives instead. That's what the triangles are. You say, I don't want minions. I just want to do more damage myself. So you forgo the minion and you just pick your favorite passives for each of these and you're going to be doing damage instead. Okay, so that's it for our abilities and that's it for our skeletons from the Book of the Dead and our mages and golems, right? Last thing we got to cover real quickly is our legendaries. For legendary effects to look out for, this one's really nice. Damaging an elite grants you a barrier, which absorbs damage. The fact that it absorbs damage is nice, right? And right when you need it. The only time you're going to need a barrier is when you're fighting an elite, because you are going to delete the trash mobs. As you can see in the footage that's like playing, you're going to delete the trash mobs without even thinking about it. Next, we've got this one here. When hit while not healthy, a magical bubble is summoned around you for 3 seconds. While standing in a bubble, players are immune. This is great because anytime you take a boom, it says while not healthy. And by the way, not healthy means you're below 80%. Below 80% health. So as soon as you get below 80% health, boom, this bubble pops around you. It makes you immune to damage for 3 seconds. It's a great, like, oh crap, I just got chunked down. Because usually if something hits you for 20% of your health in like a hit, you want to be aware of it. So it's a great alert. You'll see this bubble pop on you like, oh, I just lost 20% of my health. I better be careful. And the best thing to do when that happens is stay in the bubble, stay in the place where you took the damage. Ironically, because that's where you're safe. You're immune to damage for 3 seconds. Next, we have deal 33% increased damage while you have a barrier. And as you might have thought, that pairs perfectly with this one. So if you get this one here, damaging an elite grants you a barrier, plus you get this one here, deal 33% increased damage while you have a barrier, right? You can see how those would pair perfectly together. And they do, right? It's basically permanent 33% increased damage while you're fighting elites. Okay, next we have this one here. Your maximum number of skeletal warriors is increased by 2. This is the most like on the nose passive that we have for this build, I think. It's literally just a straight buff to our skeletons that we're summoning, right? So we get 2 extra summons because of this, which feels fantastic. You know, we will take those extra 2, right? We want more. In fact, that was like my goal, was just to find as much that I can to make myself have this living, walking army all over the place with me. Worked out great. The next one, Bone Spear's primary attack makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable. So remember how the passive on the Bone Spear makes the first one vulnerable, the first thing it hits, but only the first thing. This says, well, Bone Spear already makes the first one vulnerable. Now I'm going to make everyone that it hits after that vulnerable as well. So everything the Bone Spear hits is taking 20% extra damage from you. Huge buff. Next one that's pretty cool is being injured while crowd control grants you unstoppable. This is good on every class. Most of the times if you're going to die in Diablo 4, it's going to be because you got CC'd. The CCs, like the crowd controls, are stuns, sleeps, roots, right? These kind of things, they last a long time in this game, especially when you don't have crowd control reducing passives on your character yet. So unstoppable for 4 seconds. This basically says, boom, if you become injured or drop, in other words, if you drop below 35% health while crowd control, it's going to make you unstoppable, which is the same as saying it's going to make, you're going to break free of the crowd control instantly, and you're going to become immune to crowd control for the next 4 seconds. That's what unstoppable means. It means you're immune to crowd control. The next thing we have here, you gain 4.5 maximum essence per minion that's active. We have got 9 or 10 minions active, which means we've got almost 40 extra essence, or in other words, a 40% increase in our essence pool. That is huge. That's very big. So that's nice. That's, you know, it lets you cast a couple extra bone spears or whatever it is that you're going to be slinging at your enemy. This one just kind of feels good. And there's not a lot of better things that we have access to right now. The next one, Bone Storm and Blood Wave, are also darkness skills and deal shadow damage and gain additional effects. Enemies damaged by Bone Storm take 88 damage over 2 seconds, desecrates ground. Oh, Blood Wave desecrates the ground. It travels over, dealing 1400 shadow damage over 4 seconds. So this was another like kind of on the nose one I found at the very end here. I had never seen this one. And then right at the end of this character, I was kind of like, I had done everything I could do on it. I already had legendaries all over the place. And I found this and I was like, oh, well, hey, that's a good reason to use Blood Wave. And it's kind of why I landed on Blood Wave. It's a big part of it. I found a legendary that buffs specifically Blood Wave. So if I was going to use an ultimate, it might as well be the one that I have the legendary for. But like I said, if Blood Wave just isn't that exciting to you, feel free to switch to one of the other ones. They've got long cooldowns and most of your damage is going to come from your corpse explosion and your bone spirit anyway. And that's it, dude. That is all. You can use a two-hander. I've got a two-handed scythe, and you could also instead use 2 one-handers if you want. It doesn't make a difference. You know, the important thing to know about a two-hander is if you can get a really powerful aspect, which is what we call the legendary, the orange text here on this that says Bone Spear's primary attack makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable, right? That orange text, that's called an aspect in Diablo. And on two-handed weapons, that aspect is twice as strong as it is on a one-handed weapon. So you can only wear one of an aspect. So if you have an aspect you really like, put it on a two-handed weapon, and now it's twice as strong. If you wore it on 2 different one-handed weapons, it does not stack, right? You've got to put it on the two-hander. Just something to note, a little thing about that. And that's it, guys. That's everything that you need to know about the Necromancer. I hope I didn't rattle on too long for you there, but there was a lot of really useful information when it comes to playing this character, and hopefully it makes your experience a little bit more fun. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. This is a brand new channel. I just made this for Diablo 4. I'll be putting a ton of guides on this channel, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any questions about the Necro, please don't hesitate to leave questions down in the comments below, or if you want an answer more immediate, come swing by my Twitch stream. I'm almost certainly streaming Diablo 4 right now. I'm twitch.tv/luckyghost. So swing on by, ask me any questions you want. I love talking about Diablo, and I would love the company. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video.